Okay, we're back, and we're going to be talking about the next topic in reducing stress through design, and that is how to make modifying your code easy and safe. So I'm going to cover two techniques. So a lot of code needs to occasionally or frequently refer to string values. So rather than referring to string values directly in the code, it's very, very good if you can make constants that are defined somewhere else for those string values. That way, if you need to change those string values, you only have the one place you need to change it. Second is to put highly related things in the same single place. So encapsulating logic and data that makes sense to live together inside a class is, of course, one way. Another way is if you aren't using a class and it's just a bunch of functions or just a bunch of mappings, for example, or lookup tables, you can put all those in the same file. So let's take a look at constants first. So here I have a file in my most recent project. And so the idea behind constants is that the standard practice to make them all caps with underscores. In this case, I happen to have the string values also as all caps because I wanted them to pop in log files and such. But things like test set order, this is a more human readable string set to that. And if I refer to this 5 times in the code, and I need to change this, I don't have to go to the 5 places. So this is a really standard thing to do, but I bring it up because it's very easy to not do. Because the first time you're referring to a string constant, you're not thinking about the future necessarily of needing to refer to it again in some other code. So how do you know when it's right to do this? Well, if you can get into the habit of always doing it no matter what, that's probably the easiest thing. But if you find your string constant popping up a second time in the code or across 3 different files, suddenly you realize I'm defining this again, it's really time to make it a constant, because every time you leave a situation where something is defined in lots of places, you increase your stress later on, because what can easily happen is if you go to change those values, you might miss one, and then you have a bug, and that costs you time. So not using constants is just laying the groundwork for bugs induced by changing the code later on. So let's look at the file centralization notion. So here you can see I'm consuming some of these constants in this file. And so here I have some mappings. I'm mapping from EC2A to EC2A's URL. And I'm mapping from EC2A to EC2A's uname output, which was, for my project, different. And here we have the reverse lookup down here, where the key is actually the other thing, and you're finding out what it's associated with, which is the string. So these mappings really are doing just the opposite thing as each other. So it really makes sense to put them in the same file. And it looks like what I did was I had a few related functions that were using these mappings tucked in here as well. Now, remember when I said it's hard to remember always to do this, always to use constants? Well, here I fell short. Here I have this EC2A. Why isn't that a constant? Should be. I didn't make it that way. Why didn't I? Well, there's another phenomenon that can happen when you're coding, and that is that you just get used to a certain landscape being populated a certain way. It's like, this is my story, the story I'm familiar with. This is my habit, the way I've been doing things. I'm just going to keep doing it that way. It becomes invisible. And when I was coding this, it wasn't like I was thinking, oh, I really should change this to a constant. Oh, no, this should be a constant. It just becomes invisible. And when it becomes invisible, that's when you can wind up with a lot of instances of these things all over the place. Now, I'm going to show you one other file. Here's my wrapper for my optics spec file, what I talked about in a previous video. So here is another example where I could have done and should have done constants. I could have had a constant, all caps, PVOE underscore prefix for that. And this could have been just all caps PVOE. So these were the three project names. I knew we were never going to add a project. It was always going to be three. And these were the code names, the kind of shortened names I used in my code to refer to these things. And this became a universal string that showed up everywhere because it was in my spec file title and got pushed into my landscape and file names and directory names. It was ubiquitous. And it was all over the code too, because I didn't think to make it a constant. And then there was a time when I thought, should I change that constant? And I thought to myself, let's see, it occurs about 300 times in the code by now. It's all over the place. Do I really want to make those 300 changes? And so what I said to myself and to other people was, that's it. We can't change them. It's locked in forever. And so, that was a cost to be locked in like that. As it turns out, it didn't cause any problems. But that's what can happen, is you can become kind of locked in where there's just too much to change. Because if I change them here, and my file system has the old names, not the new names, and then I have 6 names instead of 3 appearing in the landscape, then that's confusing too. So this is an example of where I wasn't careful early on. I didn't make constants, and then I had what I'll call calcified code. I couldn't change these things. It was just too much work. One last thing I'm going to mention is that there is a minor cost to using constants in that they're a little less readable in the code. My eyes scanning /home/Ubuntu instantly pops into my mind as what it is. And EC2 underscore machine home, it's all caps, and I have to, okay, what does that mean? It's just a little bit more cognitive load to deal with constants sometimes. And I think that's one reason why subconsciously there's this resistance to doing it. And so sometimes if you're wanting to make your code really readable and comprehensible, and you're dealing with a string that's like a path name or part of a path name that really will only be touched by this one class or this one function, then it already is in one place. So you don't necessarily need to make a constant for that. Now the risk you run is later on, if that changes and it does get used in more than one place, then you're in the same boat. But like pretty much everything in software development, everything you do is involved in some trade-off or another. So putting things as constants takes a little time because you have to make sure that file is there, you have to go define it, you have to import it, and then you type it into the spot or copy and paste it. And so that's just more work than just typing the thing. But if you add up all that time across all the constants you define, and let's say that used 12 minutes of your life, but you get a bug that costs you 3 hours of your life because you didn't find all the things you needed to change, clearly it would have made sense to use constants. So there are the trade-offs, and I think we can leave it there. I will see you in the next video.